Hi guys, I'm Rice Patch. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you haven't been here before. Sorry my room looks pretty bad when it's dark. I haven't set it up for recording. Anyways, today I have another project breakdown for you guys. Last week someone recommended that I listen to one of DeleteZeke's alt accounts called Leroy, or Leroy. Specifically I listened to Dariacore 3, at least I think that's what it's called, which is the actual title. I thought it was pretty cool, so I decided to make some Dariacore myself. For a little background on the genre, Dariacore is heavily influenced by electronic music and an electronic lifestyle. Dariacore was spearheaded by none other than DeleteZeke, and the genre gets its name from the artist's favorite 1990s TV show, Daria. Dariacore usually contains a lot of pop culture references like meme sounds or even pop music. For example, Dariacore 3 features snips of acapellas from Avril Lavigne, Justin Bieber, and many more. It's generally characterized by high energy, high tempo electronic sounds and textures. So basically this is what you get when you spend most of your teenage years chronically online and you also like hyperpop. So today I have a short Dariacore project for you guys. I'm just going to be breaking down my thought process. I'll show you how to basically make every sound in this project. Also, since I use freeware, I'll try my best to think of like alternatives that you guys may be familiar with. Alright, starting out, I obviously want something pretty high energy, so I set my tempo to 180. My first point of inspiration was this chord stack. I'll show you guys how I made that. So here's the MIDI. It's just really rapid chops of different chords with a little bit of variation here and there. I made this stack using T-Force Alpha Plus, which is my favorite plugin for making easy saw chords. You could definitely make these kinds of saws in like Serum, even a more simple plugin, like it's just saw waves with like some chorus on them. But I found that T-Force Alpha Plus gives you this really gritty and oversaturated sound that I haven't really been able to achieve with other plugins right out of the box. All this is multiple saw wave oscillators with some detune and some stereo panning on them. There's also some inbuilt saturation in T-Force Alpha Plus, which I really appreciate. And the effects chain is really simple. It's just an EQ for tightness and another saturator. Alright, the chords sound okay, but they're not really filling up enough of the space. There wasn't enough chaos in my opinion, so I went for an arpeggio layer. I decided to use a different wave, not a saw wave, but a triangle. Kind of all over the place, but as long as they kind of stick to the same broken chord, you should be okay. I have the bottom line following the bass notes of the chords, and the top line repeats this note pretty often, so it kind of provides an anchor point for the arpeggio. Another thing to note is that I added a pitch glide at the beginning of the note, so it kind of like swoops in. Here's what it sounds like without, and here's what it sounds like with. So you can hear that little swoop. And it makes it kind of bubbly. All I did for effects on this was OTT and a reverb. And then later I decided to swap it out for a square wave. I'll show you what it sounds like without effects. This is just a square wave. You could do this in any plugin. All I did was put an OTT on it for sharpness and a reverb. I also auto-panned it so it would stay out of the way of the chords, which are kind of more central. Finally, just to add some higher frequencies, I put in another saw lead, this time with a little bit of chorus on it. I made this lead in triple oscillator. Like I've said before, it's pretty similar to FL's 3x oscillator. You could do this in any plugin that makes a saw wave, like Serum, Armor. Heck, you'd probably do it in like Operator or whatever. So it's really the effects that make this lead shine. Here's what the saw sounds like without anything. So we put it through some chorus, and then some reverb, and then finally an EQ just to cut the low end. The next thing that I wanted to add in was a bass. For this, again, really simple. It's just a square bass. I don't even know if I put effects on it. Yeah, no effects. It's just a square wave. Alright, so all together, the chords and the arpeggio and the bass sound like this. So we're already getting pretty close to where we want, but we're missing a lot of the characteristics of Dariacore, which is the 1990s, early 2000s acapellas and all of the pop culture references and even producer culture references. So I'm not that well versed in 1990s and 2000 pop artists myself, but I did find a couple of acapellas that I thought would fit pretty well with the vibe we're going for. So I got Ariana Grande's Into You. I also pulled Avril Lavigne's track Girlfriend, which, at least for me, pretty strongly defined 2000s music. I don't use Girlfriend in the part that I'm working on currently, but it does come in later. So I'll show you how I used Ariana Grande's acapella in this section. Rather than speeding everything up to 180 BPM, I actually just let this sit at the original tempo, which is much slower. Instead, I cut the words individually to kind of give it a more choppy feel. So you can see how disjoint that sounds, but when you play it in context, it kind of fits into it because the rest of the stuff is also really choppy. So that's pretty cool. I did a similar thing with Girlfriend. So here I've started making a new section which features Avril Lavigne's song. So I got the crazy idea to turn these chops into like Jersey, and I'll show you how I did that when we go over the drums. Alright, so the next thing that I work on is the drums. We're going to go back to the NTU section first. So the drums aren't too hard to pick. As long as you can find a kick that like really cuts through all the chaos in the rest of the track, you should be okay. And so I started out with this really simple drum pattern, which is just a 4 on the floor kick and a clap every other. And then I started to put more culture references in. For example, I found the woo yeah break, which is a pretty commonly sampled breakbeat. I took the woo and the yeah, and I put them in the background, along with some other effects. So that was sounding pretty good. Next I wanted to go back to the Girlfriend section. And I was thinking about turning this into like Jersey. So all this is a kick and a hat. And they're saturated together in the drum bus, so they become extra crunchy. This is a tip I got from Underscores, actually. And of course, if it's Jersey, you cannot forget the bed squeak. So we're basically almost done. Here's how the NTU section sounds. And here's how the Girlfriend section sounds. Alright, so finally for the intro and some transitions, I basically just filtered the chords in for the intro. And then between the NCU and the Jersey part, I actually added a couple of new sounds. The most important one is this respace. And the process for this one is pretty simple too. I started with the square wave with some distortion and then a filter envelope on it, so it makes it sound a little bit plucky. And it also has some glide on it. And then the effects chain is just an EQ to clean it up a bit. And then a really heavy chorus. This is where the Reese sound comes from. I throw it through another EQ. Finally, the saturator to add that last bit of grit in. Along with this, I chopped up an amen break. Yeah, so a lot of breakbeats in this project. I feel like that's also like a recurring theme in Dariacore and digicore. When you put the chords over it and also the Girlfriend acapella, you get this really kind of busy transition section. Yeah. Alright, there's one more thing that I need to talk about, and that's the master chain. Normally I wouldn't note on this too much because I don't do too much on my masters, but this time it actually is really important to the overall sound. So I'm just going to take the master chain off and I'll show you guys what happens when I play the NTU section. So you can see that everything comes in way too hot, and 9 times out of 10 this would be a serious issue. But in this case we're working with Dariacore, which doesn't have to be super clean. In fact, there's definitely a little bit of inherent messiness in the genre. Dariacore lets you have a lot of freedom with that. That's why I let everything in here basically clip. After a little bit of EQ to bring out the highs, I put on an MSaturator. And why MSaturator? I use MSaturator in particular because it does one thing for me that saturators don't usually do. So obviously you get the last bit of crunch, the last bit of distortion on the master, but MSaturator also limits your output at whatever the output knob is set to. Alright, so I'm stupid and I forgot to give a reason for this. Due to MSaturator limiting the output, whatever you hear out of the plugin is not subject to any more clipping from redlining. In other words, whatever you hear out of MSaturator is what your final mix sounds like, given you don't put anything else on the master. Obviously you could do this with like any saturator and a limiter, but I think something about MSaturator just sounds more crisp. This is purely subjective, and I don't even know if there's actually a difference in sound, but this is just to my ears, so that's what I'm going with. Everybody produces differently. So in this case, you can see what happens after I put MSaturator on the master. So after MSaturator, I put a little bit of stereo widening, a reverb that I use on the transitions. Finally, I checked my levels, and I'm not putting very much extra into this, but the project comes in at a whopping like -3 LUFS. So definitely one of the louder things I've produced. All right, so that's pretty much the whole breakdown. I'll play the final result for you guys in just a second. If you guys haven't seen my other video about Kenny's beat battle, you should definitely go and check it out. And also, if you want to see more of me, please subscribe, like the video, and share this with all your producer friends. Thank you guys.